The baby is too loud. I need a break. Those were the last words my husband said to me before he grabbed his bags and flew to the Maldives for a month. He left me alone with our 12-day-old daughter and a healing surgical scar. But when he finally returned, expecting to find a broken, exhausted woman, what he saw made him drop his bags and gasp. No, no, this cannot be happening. Before I tell you how a helpless mother dismantled her husband's life, tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe if you have ever built an empire from betrayal. A zipper closing sliced through the chaos. I sat in my nursing chair trying to soothe the frantic cries of my daughter Zuri. She was exactly 12 days old. My body still felt like a battlefield. The deep ache of my C-section scar throbbed with every movement, a constant reminder of the major surgery I had just endured. I looked up from Zuri's tear-streaked face to see my husband Marcus standing by the door. He was dressed in a crisp linen shirt. He sprayed his expensive cologne, overwhelming the smell of baby powder. He grabbed the handle of his Louis Vuitton duffel bag. I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what was happening. "Marcus," I said, my voice hoarse. "Where are you going?" He kept his eyes fixed on the mirror. "The baby is too loud, Nia. I need a break. My friends and I have had this trip to the Maldives planned for ages. I cannot focus with this crying." I pulled Zuri closer to my chest, shielding her from the coldness in his voice. "You need a break?" I asked, disbelief rising. "Marcus, she is 12 days old. I am still bleeding. I cannot walk up the stairs without pain. You are leaving us for a month." He finally turned to look at me, and there was no warmth in his eyes, only irritation. "You are a mother now, Nia. Figure it out. I will be back in 30 days. Do not call me unless it is an emergency. I need to disconnect." Without another word, he walked out. The front door slammed shut behind him, rattling our wedding photos. The man who had promised to love and protect me felt like a stranger. Growing up in South Atlanta taught me that begging a coward is a waste of breath. I sat in the silent house, the only sound coming from Zuri's soft whimpers. Before I could wrap my mind around being abandoned, my phone buzzed. A text message from my mother-in-law, Loretta. I took a deep breath before opening it, knowing the poison it would contain. Loretta never liked me. She always made it clear she thought her successful son was too good for a girl from the South Side. The message read exactly as I expected. "Do not bother my son while he is out networking and providing for you. You need to learn how to manage a household properly so he does not feel suffocated. He gave a girl from South Atlanta a good life, Nia. The least you can do is keep the baby quiet and let the man breathe. Be grateful." I read the words twice, feeling the sting of her condescension. For 5 years, I swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I smiled through her insults and let them believe I was just a lucky girl who married up endlessly, thankful for a roof over her head. I locked my phone. I did not shed a single tear. Crying would not change the fact that I was alone, and crying certainly would not feed my daughter. Zuri needed a diaper change, and we were down to the last pack. I placed Zuri in her bassinet, wincing as sharp pain shot across my abdomen. Moving slowly, I opened my laptop on the kitchen island. Marcus and I had a joint savings account that we had built together over the past 5 years. We had agreed to use those funds for emergencies and baby expenses while I was on maternity leave. I logged into the banking portal planning to transfer a few $100s to my checking account to order groceries and baby supplies. The screen loaded, the blue circle spinning for what felt like an eternity. When the dashboard finally appeared, a bright red banner flashed at the top of the screen. I blinked, rubbing my tired eyes, assuming the exhaustion was making me see things. I leaned closer to the monitor. The numbers stared back at me, stark and undeniable. Our joint savings account, the account that held exactly $150,000 just a week ago, was completely empty. I clicked the transaction history, my heart hammering against my ribs. There it was. A single wire transfer, initiated at 6 this morning, hours before Marcus packed his bags. The destination was an offshore account I did not recognize. I slowly looked at the available balance. $12.45. The air left the room, leaving me breathless and dizzy. My husband had not just walked out on me because the baby was crying. He had not just abandoned a healing woman in her most vulnerable moment. He had methodically and deliberately drained our entire life savings without a second thought. He had robbed his own 12-day-old daughter to fund a luxury vacation with his arrogant friends. I stood completely alone in the sprawling kitchen, staring at the glaring laptop screen, looking at a pathetic balance of $12. The betrayal was so absolute, so profoundly calculated, that it bypassed my sorrow entirely and struck a chord of deep primal survival. They thought I was just an exhausted, helpless mother who would quietly panic, cry herself to sleep, and beg for their scraps. They had absolutely no idea what kind of monster they had just unleashed. 3 days passed in a blur of feeding schedules, sleepless nights, and the betrayal of Marcus. I did not call him. I did not send frantic messages begging for an explanation. I spent 72 hours holding Zuri close, letting the reality of my depleted savings harden my spine. The tears dried up before they could fall, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. On the 4th day, the front door swung open without a knock. Heavy designer boots echoed loudly in the foyer. In walked Jasmine, the entitled sister of my husband, dragging her husband, Brent. Brent was a wealthy white investment banker who wore privilege like a tailored suit. He always looked down on Marcus, keeping him around for questionable business schemes. Jasmine worshipped the ground Brent walked on. They marched into my kitchen as if they owned the property. Jasmine wrinkled her nose at the baby bottles drying by the sink. "Look at this mess, Brent. I told you she would fall apart without my brother." Brent tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the kitchen island. The thud made Zuri stir in my arms. "Sign these right now, Nia," Brent said, his voice dripping with forced patience. "We need to expedite this process before the end of the quarter." I kept my voice deadpan. "Sign what, Brent?" He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms with a patronizing smile. "Property transfer deeds." Marcus leveraged this house to cover a massive margin call for my real estate fund. The capital dried up, and now he is completely underwater. "My firm is calling in the debt. If you do not sign the house over to my company today, the bank will foreclose by next Friday. I am actually doing you a favor handling the paperwork privately." I stared at him, letting the sheer audacity hang in the silent air. He was standing in my kitchen trying to steal my home. Jasmine crossed her arms, tapping her manicured nails. "Just sign it, Nia. Marcus is out of the country working hard to fix the financial mess you put him in. The least you can do is cooperate. You can always pack up and move back to that rundown neighborhood in South Atlanta where you belong. You never fit in here anyway." Brent chuckled, tapping the documents with a gold pen. "Come on, Nia. Do not stress your little head trying to understand big finance. The corporate world is complicated, and you are just a stay-at-home mom dealing with postpartum hormones. Put your name on the dotted line so you and the baby can secure a cheap apartment before the sheriff tosses your belongings onto the lawn." I looked down at Zuri. She was breathing softly, completely unaware of the vultures circling her home. I gently placed her into the smart bassinet nearby, making sure she was secure. Then I walked over to the kitchen island. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I picked up the thick stack of papers and ripped them straight down the middle. Jasmine gasped, stepping back in shock. "Are you absolutely crazy?" I dropped the torn halves into the recycling bin without breaking eye contact. "This house is not marital property, Brent, and Marcus certainly does not have the equity to leverage it." Brent lost his arrogant smile. His jaw tightened, the smug facade slipping just a fraction. "It is a joint asset, Nia. You are married." I rested my hands on the marble counter and leaned forward. "This house was purchased by a blind trust established by my late father before I even met Marcus. The deed belongs entirely to that trust. Marcus does not have his name on the title. He has zero legal standing to use this property as collateral for anything, let alone to bail out your sinking Ponzi scheme. So I suggest you take your racist microaggressions, your fake rescue mission, and your predatory paperwork out of my house before I call the police and have you both arrested for criminal trespassing." For a second there was total silence. Jasmine looked utterly panicked, glancing up at her husband to see how he would handle a black woman looking him dead in the eye and stripping away his power. But Brent did not look defeated. Instead, a malicious grin spread across his face. He reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a single neatly folded piece of paper. He smoothed it out and placed it delicately on the kitchen island right where the torn documents had been. "You really think you are the smartest person in the room, do you not?" Brent mocked, shaking his head. "You actually think a little family trust fund protects you from federal banking systems?" I looked down at the paper. The bold heading sent a sudden icy jolt through my veins. It was a Small Business Administration loan approval form, a highly official federal document. "Marcus knew the house was locked in a trust," Brent whispered, leaning in close enough for me to smell his stale coffee breath. "So he bypassed it entirely. He did not leverage the house, Nia. He leveraged your remarkably clean credit score and your identity." I stared at the bottom of the page, my stomach turning over. Right there next to Marcus, and his signature was my own. My full legal name signed digitally authorizing a $2 million federal business loan. "Look closely at your digital signature," Brent sneered, thoroughly enjoying my silence. "The money was wired to my firm last week. Marcus took his cut, packed his bags, and left you holding the bag. If you do not play ball and sign the house over to me quietly, to offset the massive interest, the federal government will be the ones coming for you. And trust me, they do not care about your little trust fund or your crying baby when they are prosecuting wire fraud. The baby is too loud. I need a break." Those were the words my husband threw at me as he zipped his designer luggage, abandoning our 12-day-old daughter to fly to the Maldives. He left me bleeding from a surgical scar, with a drained bank account and a fake smile from his family. But 1 month later, when he opened our door expecting to find his broken wife, he dropped his bags in sheer terror. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to destroy the person who promised to protect you. The sharp sound of a heavy zipper closing sliced through the chaotic air of our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the nursing chair, clutching my chest as my daughter Zuri screamed. She was exactly 12 days old. The agonizing ache of my C-section scar throbbed with every breath I took, a relentless reminder of the major surgery I had just endured. I looked up through exhausted eyes to see my husband Marcus standing by the door. Dressed in a crisp linen shirt, he casually lifted a bottle of Tom Ford cologne and sprayed his neck. The expensive scent filled the room, suffocating the smell of baby lotion. He grabbed the leather handle of his Louis Vuitton duffel bag, checking his reflection one last time. "Marcus," I said, my voice cracking from disbelief. "What are you doing? Where are you going?" He kept his eyes locked on his reflection, adjusting his collar. "The baby is too loud, Nia. I need a break. My friends and I had planned this Maldives trip for months. I cannot focus with this constant crying." I pulled Zuri closer, shielding her from the absolute coldness of his tone. "You need a break," I asked, my voice trembling. "Marcus, she is 12 days old. I am still bleeding through my bandages. I cannot walk down the hallway without blinding pain. You are leaving us for a month." He finally turned, his look utterly devoid of human empathy. "You are a mother now, Nia. Figure it out. I will be back in 30 days. Do not call me unless it is an emergency. I really need to disconnect." Without another word, without even a glance at our daughter, he walked out of the room. The front door slammed shut behind him, seconds later shaking our framed wedding photos. The man who had promised to love and protect me felt like an absolute stranger. Growing up in the working-class neighborhoods of South Atlanta taught me that begging a coward to stay is a complete waste of breath. I sat alone in the massive house, the only sound coming from Zuri's soft whimpers as she finally settled against my heartbeat. Before I could even process the abandonment, my phone buzzed. A text message from my mother-in-law, Loretta. I took a shaky breath before opening it, already knowing the poison it would contain. Loretta had always made it clear she thought her successful tech executive son was way too good for a girl who grew up south of Interstate 20. The message read exactly as I expected. "Do not bother my son while he is out networking and providing for you. You need to learn how to manage a household properly so he does not feel suffocated." He gave a girl from South Atlanta A very good life, Nia. The least you can do is keep the baby quiet and let the man breathe. Be grateful. I read the hateful words twice, feeling the familiar sting of her condescension. For 5 long years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had smiled tightly through her backhanded compliments and let his entire family believe I was just some lucky, uneducated girl who managed to marry up. I let them believe I was endlessly thankful just to have a fancy roof over my head. I locked my phone screen. I did not shed a single tear for Marcus or his toxic mother. Crying would not change the fact that I was entirely alone, and crying certainly would not feed my newborn daughter. Zuri needed a diaper change, and we were down to the very last pack. I gently placed Zuri into her smart bassinet, wincing as sharp pain shot across my abdomen. Moving carefully, I opened my laptop to order some basic supplies. Marcus and I had a joint savings account built together over the past 5 years. We explicitly agreed to use those funds for emergencies while I was recovering on maternity leave. I logged into the secure banking portal planning to transfer a few $100s to buy groceries and diapers. The screen loaded, the blue circle spinning endlessly. When the dashboard finally appeared, a bright red alert banner flashed across the top. I leaned closer to the monitor, assuming the exhaustion was making me read the numbers incorrectly. The digits stared back at me, stark, bold, and undeniable. Our joint savings account, the account that held exactly $150,000 just yesterday, was completely empty. I clicked the transaction history, my heart hammering violently. There was a single wire transfer initiated at 6 o'clock this morning, hours before Marcus packed his designer bags. The destination was an offshore account I did not recognize. I slowly looked down at the available balance. Exactly $12.45. The air left the room, leaving me breathless and dizzy. My husband had not just walked out on me because the baby was crying. He had deliberately drained our entire life savings. He had robbed his own 12-day-old daughter to fund a luxury vacation. They thought I was just a helpless mother who would quietly panic. They had no idea what kind of monster they had just unleashed. I did not panic. I closed my laptop, walked into the nursery, and watched Zuri sleep peacefully in her crib. My husband was halfway across the world drinking champagne on a yacht with his mistress and his entitled family, laughing at how easily they had ruined my life. I let them laugh. They had given me a 30-day head start, and I was going to use every single second of it. The next morning, I contacted Simone, a powerhouse corporate litigator known for tearing apart fraudulent executives. I did not want a divorce lawyer. I wanted a financial assassin. I arranged a secure video call and sent over the digital footprint I had captured from our home network, including the forged Small Business Administration loan documents. Simone reviewed the files in complete silence. When she finally looked at me through the screen, her eyes were sharp. "Nia," she said, her voice deadpan, "this is not just a messy divorce. This is federal wire fraud. Forging a digital signature on a government-backed business loan is a massive felony. Factoring in the identity theft and the interstate wire transfers to Brent's firm, Marcus and his brother-in-law are looking at up to 20 years in federal prison." A cold thrill ran down my spine. 20 years. Marcus thought he was a genius for bypassing the family trust, but his greed had blinded him to the legal reality of what he had done. He had literally handed me the match to burn his entire life to the ground. Simone asked if I wanted to contact the authorities immediately. I shook my head. Not yet. If we spook them now, they might try to hide the money or claim it was a misunderstanding. I need them to feel absolutely invincible. I need them to keep making mistakes. To trap a predator, you have to play the perfect prey. I picked up my phone and opened a text message thread with Brent. I needed to feed his massive white savior complex to make him feel like the untouchable king of finance dealing with a pathetic, uneducated housewife. I typed out the most desperate message I could stomach. Brent, I am so sorry to bother you. Marcus took all our savings, and I do not have anything left for Zuri. Can you please loan me $500 just for groceries and baby formula until he gets back? I am terrified, and I do not know what to do. Please help me. I hit send and waited. I knew exactly how Brent operated. He thrived on the subjugation of others. especially a black woman, he already looked down upon. Asking him for a meager $500 would inflate his ego to astronomical heights. 30 minutes later, my phone chimed. It was a response from Brent, likely typed with one hand while holding a cocktail on the Maldivian coast. Relax, Nia. I wired $500 to your checking account. Do not spend it all on designer shoes. Leave the complex financial matters to the men. Marcus will handle everything when he gets back. Just focus on being a mom. I rolled my eyes at his blatant misogyny, but as I scrolled down, my breath caught in my throat. Brent was arrogant, but he was also sloppy. In his drunken haste to reply to my message and show off his power, he had forwarded his response from his primary work email instead of his personal account. And attached to the bottom of the email thread was a massive unencrypted file. I downloaded the file and opened it on my laptop. It was the master financial ledger for Brent's entire investment firm. He had accidentally handed me the unfiltered, unredacted map of his entire corporate structure. The arrogant investment banker had just given the helpless housewife the exact coordinates to his financial empire. I began scrolling through the data, my mind racing as I analyzed the numbers. I was deep into his balance sheets when my phone chimed again. This time, it was a specialized alert tone I had set for a very specific email address. I switched tabs and opened my secure inbox. The sender was the acquisition team at a major Silicon Valley tech conglomerate. For the past 6 months, their developers had been secretly beta testing Melanin Mama, the maternal health application I had coded from scratch. They had been scrutinizing the artificial intelligence metrics, analyzing the user engagement, and evaluating the predictive health algorithms I had built for women of color. I clicked the email open, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. The message was concise, professional, and completely life-changing. Dear Nia, our executive board has concluded the final review of the Melanin Mama platform. The predictive algorithms exceed our current market capabilities. We are prepared to bypass the standard venture capital funding rounds and offer a complete buyout of your intellectual property effective immediately. I scrolled down to the attached term sheet. My eyes locked onto the bolded number at the bottom of the page. They were offering $45 million in cash. I sat in the quiet glow of my laptop screen. $45 million. In a matter of minutes, I had gone from a discarded wife begging for grocery money to a multi-millionaire tech founder holding the financial execution papers for the men who tried to destroy me. I looked over at Zuri, who was stretching her tiny arms in her sleep. Marcus and Brent thought they had left me with absolutely nothing. They thought they had buried me under a mountain of debt and despair. But they were about to learn a very brutal lesson. When you try to bury a woman who knows how to code, you do not destroy her. You just give her the perfect dark environment to plant a bomb. The soft, rhythmic sound of Zuri nursing was the only noise in the quiet living room. I sat in the velvet armchair, the same spot where Marcus had abandoned us, balancing my infant daughter in one arm and my laptop on my knees. The blue light from the screen illuminated the dark room, casting sharp shadows across the painted walls. The air felt entirely different now. The heavy weight of victimhood had completely vanished, replaced by the electric hum of absolute power. I was no longer a discarded wife. I was a predator, meticulously studying her prey. I opened the master financial ledger Brent had so arrogantly forwarded to my personal inbox. He genuinely believed I was too uneducated to understand a spreadsheet. He thought I was just another black woman he could condescend to and dismiss. That racist, sexist blind spot was about to cost him his entire life. I took a deep breath, adjusted Zuri gently against my chest, and began to scroll through the massive Excel file. It did not take a financial genius to see the disaster hiding behind Brent's tailored suits and country club memberships. His investment firm was a catastrophic mess. He projected the image of a Wall Street titan, but the numbers painted the picture of a desperate gambler. I traced the flow of capital from one subsidiary to another. It was a classic, desperate shell game. Brent was taking money from new investors and using it to pay off the returns of older clients. His entire corporate structure was a glorified Ponzi scheme, teetering on the absolute edge of complete collapse. He was not a mastermind, he was a fraud in a very expensive tie. I isolated the search parameters hunting for a very specific number, $2 million. The exact amount Marcus had stolen using my forged signature on that federal business loan. It only took me 4 minutes to find it. The federal funds had been wired directly into Brent's primary operating account just 3 days before they all flew to the Maldives. But the money did not sit there. It was immediately transferred out, fragmented into 3 different payments, and sent to an aggressive corporate creditor. Brent had not used the stolen loan to fund a lucrative real estate deal like he claimed. He had used it to stave off bankruptcy. The $2 million was a desperate, panicked plug in a rapidly sinking ship. Marcus had risked 20 years in a federal penitentiary just to buy his arrogant brother-in-law a few more weeks of freedom. I smiled gently, patting Zuri's back as she drifted into a deep sleep. They had stolen my name and my credit to save a fraudulent empire. They thought the money was gone, washed through corporate accounts, and impossible to trace. But numbers leave a permanent trail, and I knew exactly how to follow it. I needed to know who had Brent so terrified. Who was the aggressive corporate creditor that forced an arrogant man to commit federal wire fraud just to make a payment? I highlighted the routing numbers associated with the outgoing transfers. I opened a new secure tab and accessed a global corporate registry database. I started peeling back the layers of the creditor, bypassing the shell companies and dummy corporations designed to hide the true owners. The first layer revealed a holding company based in Delaware. I dug deeper. The holding company belonged to a private equity group in San Francisco. I kept digging, following the digital paper trail with relentless precision. The private equity group was wholly owned by a much larger corporate entity. When the final name loaded on my screen, my hands actually stopped moving entirely. I stared at the bright white letters, my mind racing to process the sheer magnitude of the coincidence. It was not just a random corporate entity. The aggressive creditor holding the debt that was choking Brent's firm, the massive institution that had the absolute power to crush his entire life, was a subsidiary of the exact same Silicon Valley tech conglomerate that had just sent me the buyout offer for Melanin Mama. The universe has a dark, beautiful sense of humor. Brent was desperately trying to hide from a corporate titan, and that exact corporate titan was currently offering me $45 million in cash to acquire my intellectual property. They wanted my app, and they held Brent's financial life securely in their hands. The leverage I suddenly possessed was almost too massive to calculate. I carefully placed Zuri into her bassinet, making sure she was comfortable and safe. I stood up and walked over to the large bay windows looking out into the quiet Atlanta night. Marcus and Brent were thousands of miles away, drinking expensive liquor on a white sand beach, thinking they had outsmarted a helpless housewife. They had no idea that I was standing in the dark holding the master key to their total destruction. I walked back to my laptop and opened a secure reply to the Silicon Valley acquisition team. I did not just want to sell my application anymore. I wanted a much bigger seat at the table. I began to type my counteroffer outlining a highly specific financial maneuver. I was going to use a portion of my $45 million payout to purchase a very specific portfolio of debt. I was going to buy the exact debt that Brent owed. I hit send and closed the laptop. The quiet hum of the house felt like a countdown. Brent thought he was the ultimate predator in the financial world. He thought he could steal from me, condescend to me, and walk away without a single consequence. But he had fundamentally misunderstood who held the real power. I was not just going to report him to the authorities. I was going to legally own him body and soul. And when he finally returned from his stolen vacation, I was going to foreclose on his entire existence. The baby is too loud. I need a break. Those were the exact words my husband spoke before he zipped his luggage and abandoned our 12-day-old daughter to fly to the Maldives. He left me bleeding from surgery with a drained bank account and a fake smile from his family. But 1 month later, when he opened our front door expecting to find his broken wife, he dropped his bags in sheer terror. Before I continue, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to destroy the person who promised to protect you. The sharp sound of a heavy zipper closing sliced through the chaotic air of our bedroom. I sat on the edge of the nursing chair, clutching my chest as my daughter Zuri screamed. She was exactly 12 days old. The agonizing ache of my C-section scar throbbed with every breath I took, a relentless reminder of the major surgery I had just endured. I looked up through exhausted eyes to see my husband Marcus standing by the door. Dressed in a crisp linen shirt, he casually lifted a bottle of Tom Ford cologne and sprayed his neck. The expensive scent filled the room, suffocating the smell of baby lotion. He grabbed the leather handle of his Louis Vuitton duffel bag, checking his reflection one last time. Marcus. I finally said, my voice cracking from disbelief. What are you doing? Where are you going? He kept his eyes locked on his reflection, adjusting his collar. The baby is too loud, Nia. I need a break. My friends and I had planned this Maldives trip for months. I cannot focus with this constant crying. I pulled Zuri closer, shielding her from the absolute coldness of his tone. You need a break, I asked, my voice trembling. Marcus, she is 12 days old. I am still bleeding through my bandages. I cannot walk down the hallway without blinding pain. You are leaving us for a month. He finally turned to face me, his look utterly devoid of human empathy. You are a mother now, Nia. Figure it out. I will be back in 30 days. Do not call me unless it is an emergency. I really need to disconnect. Without another single word, without even a passing glance at our crying daughter, he walked out of the room. The front door slammed shut behind him seconds later, shaking our framed wedding photos. The man who had promised to love and protect me felt like an absolute stranger. Growing up in the working-class neighborhoods of South Atlanta taught me that begging a coward to stay is a complete waste of breath. I sat alone in the massive house, the only sound coming from Zuri's soft whimpers as she finally settled against my heartbeat. Before I could even process the sudden abandonment, my phone buzzed loudly. A text message from my mother-in-law, Loretta. I took a deep breath before opening it, already knowing the poison it would contain. Loretta had always made it clear she thought her successful tech executive son was way too good for a girl who grew up south of Interstate 20. The message read exactly as I expected. Do not bother my son while he is out networking and providing for you. You need to learn how to manage a household properly so that he does not feel suffocated. He gave a girl from South Atlanta a very good life, Nia. The least you can do is keep the baby quiet and let the man breathe. Be grateful. I read the hateful words twice, feeling the familiar and deeply painful sting of her condescension. For 5 long years, I had swallowed my pride to keep the peace. I had smiled tightly through her backhanded compliments and let his entire family believe I was just some lucky, uneducated girl who managed to marry up. I let them believe I was endlessly thankful just to have a fancy roof over my head. I locked my phone. I did not shed a single tear for Marcus or his toxic mother. Crying would not change the fact that I was entirely alone, and crying certainly would not feed my newborn daughter. Zuri needed a diaper change, and we were down to the very last pack. I gently placed Zuri into her new smart bassinet, wincing as sharp pain shot across my abdomen. Moving carefully, I opened my laptop to order some basic supplies. Marcus and I had a joint savings account built together over the past 5 years. We explicitly agreed to use those funds for emergencies while I was recovering on maternity leave. I logged into the secure banking portal, planning to transfer a few $100s to buy groceries and diapers. The screen loaded, the blue circle spinning endlessly. When the dashboard finally appeared, a bright red alert banner flashed across the top. I leaned closer to the monitor, assuming the exhaustion was making me read the numbers incorrectly. The digits stared back at me, stark, bold, and undeniable. Our joint savings account, the account that held exactly $150,000 just yesterday, was completely empty. I clicked the transaction history, my heart hammering violently. There was a single wire transfer initiated at 6 in the morning hours, before Marcus packed his designer bags. The destination was an offshore account that I did not recognize. I slowly looked down at the available balance. Exactly $12.45. The air left the room, leaving me breathless and dizzy. My husband had not just walked out on me because the baby was crying. He had deliberately drained our entire life savings. He had robbed his own 12-day-old daughter to fund a luxury vacation. They thought I was just a helpless mother who would quietly panic. They had no idea what kind of monster they had unleashed. The response from the Silicon Valley acquisition team arrived less than 12 hours after I sent my counteroffer. They were eager. My application, Melanin Mama, possessed the exact predictive health algorithms they needed to dominate a completely untapped demographic in the maternal care market. They wanted total ownership immediately. I arranged a secure video conference for the next morning. I sat at my dining room table wearing a faded gray sweatshirt, my hair tied up in a messy bun. Zuri was sleeping soundly in the next room. On my laptop screen, 5 highly paid corporate executives in tailored suits nodded as their lead counsel read over the final stipulations of my counteroffer. They agreed to the $45 million cash buyout. More importantly, they agreed to facilitate the swift transfer of the specific debt portfolio I had requested. The aggressive corporate creditor, holding Brent by the throat, was going to sell that exact debt directly to me. I just quietly signed the digital contract with a few keystrokes. Within 2 hours, my phone vibrated on the glass table. I opened my private banking app. The screen refreshed, and a massive wire transfer cleared. I stared at the numbers glowing back at me in the dim light of the living room. $45 million in unrestricted funds. I was officially a multi-millionaire. I had enough money to buy and sell Marcus and his toxic family 10 times over. Yet when the local mail carrier dropped off a routine package at the front door exactly 10 minutes later, I walked out to retrieve it, wearing the exact same tired sweatpants I had been wearing since my husband abandoned me. Wealth does not require you to change your wardrobe. True power is walking around your house looking like a discarded, exhausted mother, while secretly possessing the financial leverage to destroy the men who tried to ruin your life. With the cash secured in my accounts, I immediately set the corporate trap. I hired an attorney to create a blind shell company registered in Delaware. A blind shell company operates under strict layers of corporate anonymity, meaning no one could trace ownership back to me. Through this newly formed entity, I authorized the immediate purchase of Brent's outstanding debt portfolios from the Silicon Valley subsidiary. The financial transaction was exceptionally swift, undeniably brutal, and entirely legal under corporate law. By the time the markets officially closed at the very end of the business day, my shell company was the sole owner of the $2 million debt that Brent owed. Brent thought he was a brilliant Wall Street genius, completely untouchable in his expensive tailored suits. He genuinely believed that ruthlessly stealing $2 million through a forged federal business loan would successfully save his crumbling investment firm from total and absolute financial collapse. He thought he had outsmarted his corporate creditors with a brilliant financial maneuver. But all he had actually done was hand the leash of his entire professional and personal existence directly to me. As the rightful owner of his debt portfolio, I possessed the authority to demand immediate repayment in full. When his fraudulent, mismanaged firm inevitably defaulted on my timeline, I would have the unilateral legal right to freeze his accounts, seize his remaining personal assets, liquidate his firm entirely, and ruthlessly foreclose on everything he had ever built. I officially owned the arrogant, condescending white investment banker who had tried to intimidate me. He was currently drinking expensive imported cocktails on a pristine beach in the Maldives, completely unaware that a black woman he had mercilessly mocked in her own kitchen was now his sole financial master. The legal and financial web was perfectly woven, and the corporate trap was firmly set. I just needed to wait patiently for them to return from their stolen vacation to spring it. But arrogant villains are rarely patient. They simply cannot help but try to twist the knife deeper. I was reviewing the final foreclosure documents when a loud, aggressive pounding echoed through the house. It was not a polite knock. It was the frantic, demanding pounding of someone trying to cause a scene. I closed my laptop, walked out of the office, and peered through the front window. A police cruiser was parked directly in my driveway, its lights reflecting off the living room walls. Standing on my front porch, glaring through the glass door, was my mother-in-law, Loretta. She was wearing her Sunday church clothes, clutching her designer handbag like a weapon. Beside her stood a uniformed police officer, looking uncomfortable but alert. Loretta had not come to check on her granddaughter or offer support to a healing mother. She had come to orchestrate an ambush. I unlocked the front door and pulled it open, maintaining a calm expression. Loretta did not even wait for the officer to speak. She immediately pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. "There she is!" Officer Loretta practically shouted, ensuring the nosy neighbors across the street could hear. "Look at her. Look at the state of her clothes. My son is out of the country working himself to the bone to provide for this family, and she is in here neglecting my newborn granddaughter." The seasoned police officer quickly held up a gloved hand, actively trying to carefully de-escalate the hostile situation unfolding on my front porch. He turned to face me directly, his tone strictly formal. "Good afternoon. We received a frantic call requesting an immediate wellness check at this exact residence." The caller explicitly stated there is a newborn child in the home who is in immediate danger due to severe maternal neglect and an unsanitary environment. Loretta pushed past the officer, her eyes gleaming with pure malicious intent. "I demand you go inside and check on that baby now. She is unfit, she is unstable, and I am calling Child Protective Services to take custody of my precious granddaughter today." The heavy front door swung open. Loretta marched in her heels, clicking sharply. A police officer followed. His eyes swept the room with careful neutrality. Loretta did not wait for an invitation. She pointed directly at my face. "There she is, officer," she announced loudly. "Look at her. My son works tirelessly, and this woman is neglecting my precious newborn granddaughter." I stood my ground, wearing the faded sweatpants I had worn all week. Zuri rested against my chest, breathing steadily. I did not scramble to tidy up the baby bottles on the counter. I nodded at the officer. He stood between Loretta and me. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "we received a call claiming an infant here faces immediate danger due to severe maternal neglect. We must perform a check." Loretta scoffed, waving at the kitchen. "Look at those bottles. She is unfit. Take that baby into protective custody right now before she does something unthinkable." I gently rubbed Zuri's back. "Officer," I said calmly, "inspect my home. The kitchen is fully stocked, the nursery perfect, and my daughter is healthy. You will find nothing wrong." Loretta let out a mocking laugh. "She is a master manipulator. Call the social worker in here right now. I want her declared unfit." The officer gave Loretta a stern look. "We follow standard protocol," he explained. "A representative from Child Protective Services is waiting outside. She will evaluate the child's well-being." I nodded. "Please invite her inside." The officer spoke into his radio. Loretta crossed her arms, a look of triumphant vindication in her eyes. She believed she had backed me into a corner. Heavy footsteps approached the porch. The door pushed open. A sharply dressed African-American woman stepped inside holding a clipboard. Her expression was pure bureaucratic focus. Then the social worker looked up. Her eyes locked onto my face. The professional mask slipped. A tiny gasp escaped her lips. "Nia," she whispered. It was Kiara, my loyal college roommate. We spent 4 years sharing a cramped dorm, studying and supporting each other. Kiara knew my character. She also knew exactly what kind of toxic family Marcus came from. I offered Kiara a knowing smile. "Hello, Kiara." Loretta frowned, looking between us. "You two know each other?" she demanded, her voice laced with suspicion. "I want a different social worker. This is a conflict of interest. She will cover up the neglect." Kiara recovered her professional composure. She stood taller, adjusting her clipboard. "Ma'am," she said to Loretta, her voice cold, "I conduct assessments based on evidence. If there is neglect here, I will document it. If not, I will close the case. Now please step aside so I can do my job." Loretta clamped her mouth shut, stepping back. Kiara walked past her. She checked the drying bottles. She inspected the nursery, checking the bassinet and clean baby clothes. Finally, she approached me and gently examined Zuri. She checked the baby's skin, breathing, and responsiveness. Zuri let out a soft coo, relaxed in my arms. Kiara finished her notes and turned to the officer. The child is in exceptional health. The home environment is clean, secure, and appropriate. There are absolutely zero signs of neglect or endangerment. I am clearing the mother and closing this investigation immediately. Loretta turned purple with rage. Are you blind? She shrieked, pointing at me. She does not even have a job. My son pays for everything. She is a lazy gold digger. Kiara closed her folder. Actually, ma'am, she said, taking a deliberate step toward my mother-in-law. Filing a false malicious report with Child Protective Services is a serious crime. Wasting law enforcement resources to harass a new mother is a jailable offense. I have your contact information. If you ever call our hotline with another baseless lie, I will personally see to it that you are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The police officer placed a hand on his belt. You heard her, ma'am. I strongly suggest you leave right now before I cite you for filing a false police report. Loretta's arrogant facade shattered instantly. The threat of actual legal consequences caused pure panic to wash over her face. She survived on social status and church gossip. The thought of being arrested on my front lawn was her ultimate nightmare. She stumbled backward toward the open door, her hands shaking. You have not heard the last of this? Nia, she stammered. Marcus will deal with you. She turned quickly to flee down the porch steps. In her frantic rush, her designer handbag caught on the doorframe. The bag jerked violently, tipping sideways. The clasp popped open. A cascade of items spilled out onto my hardwood floor. Lipstick, a compact mirror, mints, and a crumpled piece of paper. Loretta scrambled to pick up her belongings, her face burning with deep humiliation. But she missed the paper. She practically ran to her car, desperate to escape. The officer apologized for the intrusion and followed Loretta out. Kiara and I were finally alone. She let out a long breath and pulled me into a tight hug. I cannot believe you are dealing with these people. Nia, she whispered. I told you Marcus was bad news. I know, I replied, hugging her back. But it is almost over. I promise. After Kiara left, I locked the front door. I looked down at the floor and saw the crumpled piece of paper Loretta had left behind. I picked it up. It was a sales receipt from a high-end boutique in the Maldives. It was for a luxury diamond watch. The purchase price was $45,000. I looked at the payment method listed at the bottom. It was a credit card number I instantly recognized. It was tied directly to the federal business loan Marcus had stolen using my forged signature. I smiled, folding the receipt carefully and sliding it into my pocket. Loretta had just handed me physical proof. I needed more than just a paper receipt to build an airtight federal case. I needed a verified confession. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the tree line outside my living room window, casting long, dramatic shadows across the hardwood floor. The transition from day to twilight felt incredibly fitting. My time of playing the passive, exhausted victim was officially coming to an end. It was time to go on the offensive. I walked over to the sleek entertainment center and retrieved two small, high-definition security cameras I had purchased during my pregnancy to monitor the nanny we eventually decided not to hire after Marcus complained about the cost. I positioned one on the top bookshelf and the other discreetly behind a framed photograph on the marble mantel. Both cameras offered crystal-clear audio recording and a direct feed to my encrypted cloud server. I checked the angles on my phone to ensure the entire living room was perfectly in the frame. Everything was set. I sat down in the center of the sofa, letting the fading sunlight wash over me. I needed to channel every ounce of despair I had felt on the day Marcus abandoned me. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let my voice drop into a wavering, desperate register. I picked up my phone and dialed Jasmine's international number. It was late evening in the Maldives, prime time for the rich and arrogant to be deep into their expensive champagne. The phone rang 3 times before Jasmine picked up. The background noise was loud. I could hear the rhythmic crashing of ocean waves and the unmistakable clinking of crystal glasses. "Hello, Jasmine," drawled her voice, thick and slurred with alcohol. "Who is this Jasmine?" "It is Nia," I said, forcing a heavy sob into the back of my throat. "Please do not hang up." She let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh my God. Brent, it is the charity case. She is crying." "What do you want, Nia?" "We are in the middle of a private dinner on the beach. I let out another manufactured sob, clutching my chest as if I were hyperventilating. Jasmine, please, I begged, pitching my voice an octave higher to sound completely helpless. You have to talk to Brent for me. You have to convince him to give me more time to move out of the house. I have absolutely nowhere to go with Zuri. My bank account is empty. I cannot afford a lawyer to fight the bank. Please just give me one more month to find a cheap apartment. I could hear Jasmine taking a long sip of her drink. The ice clinked against the glass. You really are pathetic, Nia, she sneered. You thought you hit the jackpot when you trapped my brother with a pregnancy. You thought you could just sit in that big house and pretend you were one of us. But you are just a girl from the wrong side of Atlanta who got played. I sniffled loudly, gripping the phone tight. I am not trying to be one of you, I pleaded. I just do not understand how Marcus could use the house as collateral. The house is in a trust. It does not make any sense. I am going to be arrested if the bank finds out what he did. Jasmine laughed again, a cruel, triumphant sound that echoed through the speaker. Oh, sweetie, you are so incredibly dense. Marcus did not leverage the house. He and Brent are way too smart for you. They bypassed your little trust fund completely. They photoshopped your state identification and faked the IP address on your laptop to secure a federal business loan. $2 million, Nia. They put the entire loan in your name. I kept my voice shaking. No, that is impossible. The bank would check the signatures. You really do not get it, do you? Jasmine bragged, completely drunk on expensive champagne and her own massive ego. Brent works in high-level finance. He knows exactly how to manipulate the digital approval systems. He walked Marcus through the entire process. They forged your digital signature perfectly. The federal government thinks you took out the money to fund a failing business. When the loan defaults, the feds are coming straight for you. You are going down for it, Nia. You are going to prison, and my brother is going to take full custody of that baby. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained entirely blank. The hidden cameras were capturing every single syllable. But what if I tell the police I whimpered, playing the final card to seal the trap? What if I tell them Marcus and Brent planned this? Who is going to believe you? Jasmine mocked. You are an unemployed, unstable mother with no money. Brent is a respected investment banker. Marcus is a tech executive. We have the money, we have the power, and you have absolutely nothing. Now stop calling me. You are ruining my vacation. The line went dead. The silence in the living room was absolute. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear. The facade of the terrified, helpless victim vanished instantly. I stood up, walked over to my laptop, and pulled up the video feed from the hidden cameras. The audio was pristine. Jasmine had just provided a detailed, legally binding confession of interstate wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud the federal government. She had directly implicated her husband and her brother, outlining their exact methodology. I extracted the audio file, ran it through a quick clarity filter to isolate Jasmine's slurred bragging, and attached it to a highly secure email. I did not send it to a local police department. Local cops do not have the resources or the jurisdiction to handle complex corporate financial crimes. I addressed the email directly to the White-Collar Crime Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Atlanta. I added Brent's unencrypted financial ledgers, the forged loan documents, and the digital receipt for the $45,000 luxury watch to the attachments. I typed a brief professional summary of the attached evidence and provided my contact information. I clicked send and watched the progress bar fill the screen. The bait had been cast, the predator had aggressively taken the hook, and the trap was permanently snapped shut. They thought they were enjoying the vacation of a lifetime, but they had just booked a one-way ticket to federal prison. Sending that email to the authorities was the most satisfying moment of my professional life. I watched the progress bar hit 100% and flash a confirmation checkmark. The evidence was officially sitting in the secure inbox of the White-Collar Crime Division. Federal investigations take time. The agents would need a few days to verify the unencrypted ledgers match the digital signatures and cross-reference Jasmine's drunken confession. Waiting is a difficult game. I needed something immediate. I picked up my phone and opened a fake social media profile. I typed Marcus into the search bar. He had always been obsessed with his digital footprint, carefully curating an image of the wealthy, untouchable tech executive. His profile was public. I clicked on his latest story posted just 4 hours ago. The high-definition video filled my screen. Marcus was standing on the bow of a luxury private yacht wearing designer sunglasses and holding a crystal flute of champagne. The turquoise waters of the Indian Ocean stretched out perfectly behind him. Next to him stood a young woman who looked barely 22, wearing a microscopic bikini. She draped her arm over his shoulder and kissed his cheek. Marcus looked directly into the camera and smiled that arrogant smile. The caption at the bottom of the video read, "Single and thriving. Living my absolute best life. No stress, just blessings. Single and thriving." The sheer audacity burned into my memory. He was legally married to a woman recovering from surgery. He was the father of a baby girl sleeping in the next room. He funded this entire illusion by stealing $2 million from the government using my forged signature. He thought his actions existed in a vacuum, insulated from consequence. I looked at his smug face and decided waiting for the federal agents was not enough. A federal indictment was going to ruin his future, but I was going to ruin his present. I opened my laptop and navigated to the website of the international airline they used. During our 5 years of marriage, Marcus and I shared a premium frequent flyer account to accumulate miles. He was so arrogant that he never bothered to change the password or remove my access after he drained our bank accounts. He assumed I was too overwhelmed to log into an airline portal. I typed in our credentials. The dashboard loaded immediately. I clicked on the upcoming trips tab. There it was. A confirmed first-class direct return ticket from Mail International Airport in the Maldives to Atlanta, scheduled to depart in exactly 18 hours. The ticket cost $12,000. I hovered my cursor over the bold red button that read, "Cancel itinerary." As his legal wife and a joint account holder, I had full administrative authority over the booking. I did not blink. I clicked the button. A warning prompt appeared advising me that the flight was non-refundable and the balance would be converted into future flight credit tied to the primary account. I clicked confirm. The screen refreshed. The $12,000 first-class ticket vanished into the digital void. Marcus was officially stranded on a remote island chain in the Indian Ocean. I sat back and pictured exactly how the next 24 hours would unfold. Marcus, Brent, Jasmine, and the mistress would arrive at the exclusive VIP check-in desk, expecting priority boarding. The ticketing agent would type his name into the system frown and politely inform the arrogant executive that his reservation had been canceled. Marcus would demand to speak to a manager, waving his status around like a weapon. The manager would confirm the cancellation. When Marcus tried to simply buy a new first-class ticket on the spot, he would hit a massive wall. First-class flights booked on the day of departure cost a fortune, and Marcus had no actual money left. The stolen loan was locked up in Brent's failing firm. Marcus would be forced to swallow his massive pride. He would have to ask his young mistress to max out her personal credit cards just to get him a seat on the plane. He would have to beg Brent to cover the difference. Because they were booking at the very last minute with limited funds, there would be no luxury direct flights available. Marcus was going to be stuffed into a cramped middle seat in the deepest section of economy class. He was going to endure a brutal 30-hour journey with 3 separate layovers in poorly ventilated airports, completely stripped of his precious first-class privilege. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water, feeling incredibly refreshed. The sun had fully set, now plunging the neighborhood into darkness. I did not turn on the lights. I simply stood by the counter, sipping my water and waiting for the inevitable explosion. It happened the next morning, right around the time his original flight was scheduled to board. My phone vibrated violently against the marble counter. The screen lit up with a barrage of text messages from Marcus. I opened the thread and read the frantic, rage-filled words. The first message was a string of angry question marks. The second arrived a minute later. "Did you log into my airline account?" The third message was a massive block of text. You canceled my flight. I am standing at the ticket counter and they are telling me my wife canceled my first-class ticket. Are you completely insane? I am forced to fly 30 hours in a middle seat by the bathrooms because of you. I had to beg Brent for money. Pack your bags right now. Take the baby and get out of my house. You are dead when I get home tomorrow. I read the threat twice. He was furious, humiliated, and desperate. He was flying home thinking he was going to punish a helpless woman. He had absolutely no idea he was flying directly into a federal cage. I slept better that night than I had in 5 long years. The constant background anxiety of Marcus and his suffocating family was completely gone forever. I woke up early the next morning feeling exceptionally sharp-focused and entirely in control of my own destiny. Zuri was cooing happily in her crib, completely oblivious to the massive storm her mother was about to bring down upon her father. After feeding her and getting dressed in a tailored blazer and comfortable slacks, I packed my laptop and a physical backup drive containing every single piece of evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past few days. I secured Zuri in her car seat and drove straight downtown. I was not going to a local police precinct. A local detective would look at this like a domestic dispute over a bank account. I needed people who understood complex corporate financial crimes and had the jurisdiction to actually destroy Brent's entire empire once and for all. I pulled up to an unmarked office building in the heart of Atlanta. It looked like any other corporate structure blending perfectly into the city skyline. But the security protocols inside were highly intense and very strictly enforced. I left Zuri with my trusted friend Kiara, who met me in the bright lobby to help. I walked through the metal detectors alone and was escorted to a sterile, windowless conference room on the 14th floor. 2 federal agents were waiting for me. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Miller and Special Agent Davis from the White Collar Crime Division. They wore plain dark suits, but their demeanor was strictly business. They did not offer me coffee or make any small talk. They sat across the large metal table, opened a fresh legal pad, and asked me to walk them through the detailed email I had sent to their secure division inbox the night before. I did not waste their valuable time with tears or emotional stories about my husband abandoning me. I spoke to them as a fellow professional. I placed the physical backup drive on the table and slid it across to Agent Miller. I told them my husband and his brother-in-law forged my digital signature to secure a $2 million federal business loan. I explained exactly how they bypassed security protocols by faking my computer identification address to hide their criminal tracks. I watched Agent Davis take notes, his expression remaining entirely neutral. Then I pulled up my laptop and showed them the unencrypted financial ledgers Brent had accidentally forwarded to me. I walked them through the money trail, pointing out exactly how the stolen $2 million was wired into Brent's primary corporate account and immediately diverted to pay off an aggressive private equity creditor to hide his failing Ponzi scheme from his remaining investors. Agent Miller stopped taking notes and looked at me, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his stoic face. He asked how I managed to obtain an unencrypted ledger from a licensed investment firm without raising any alarms. I told him Brent was an arrogant man who thought I was too uneducated to understand a basic spreadsheet. The agents exchanged a brief knowing look, but the financial documents were only half of the package. I opened the audio file I had captured on the hidden living room cameras. I pressed play and let Jasmine's drunken bragging voice echo off the bare walls of the conference room. Jasmine detailed exactly how her husband and her brother planned the theft, how they forged my signature, and how they intended to let me take the full fall and go to federal prison while they enjoyed the stolen cash on a beautiful tropical island. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The moment the audio finished playing, Agent Davis closed his legal pad and stood up. This was no longer just an investigation into a husband stealing from his wife. The agents realized they were looking at a multi-million-dollar interstate wire fraud case involving a registered investment firm, massive identity theft, and a coordinated conspiracy to defraud the federal government. Brent had used a licensed corporate entity to process stolen federal funds, Marcus had orchestrated the digital forgery. Jasmine had provided the verbal confession tying it all together as a premeditated criminal enterprise. These arrogant people had practically gift-wrapped their own federal indictments and handed them directly to the authorities on a silver platter without a second thought. Agent Miller leaned forward, resting his hands heavily on the table. He told me they had enough actionable evidence to secure immediate federal arrest warrants for both Marcus and Brent. The financial ledgers alone provided probable cause to freeze every single corporate and personal account tied to Brent's firm, effectively ending his career today. I sat perfectly still, absorbing the absolute certainty in his voice. They were going to dismantle Brent's entire financial structure before he even stepped off his connecting flight. Agent Davis looked at his watch and then looked directly at me. He stated that they had been tracking the flight manifests since reviewing my initial email the previous night. He confirmed that Marcus Brent and the rest of their guilty party were currently on their final, agonizing layover. They were exhausted, broke, and completely unaware of the trap waiting for them. They land at exactly 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, Agent Davis said, his voice completely flat and devoid of any emotion. We are sending a fully equipped tactical team to intercept them at the airport terminal. Do you want to be there when we finally put the cuffs on them and drag them away? I looked at the two federal agents who were about to execute the men who thought they had buried me. A slow, calm smile spread across my face. No, I replied, my voice steady and cold. I am hosting the welcome home party. The morning sun broke through the tall windows of the living room, casting long, sharp lines of light across the hardwood floor. It was the dawn of my final day in this house, and the air felt electric. I did not wake up with the heavy exhaustion that had plagued me for the past month. I woke up with the precise, calculated energy of a woman about to execute a masterpiece. Today was the day Marcus and his toxic entourage were scheduled to return from their stolen paradise. They were flying back, expecting to find a broken, weeping wife begging for their mercy. I was going to give them a corporate execution instead. At exactly 8 in the morning, a team of premium private movers arrived at my front door. I had hired the most efficient, discreet luxury relocation service in Atlanta. I handed the lead foreman a detailed floor plan and gave him one simple instruction. I wanted every single trace of my existence and my daughter's existence completely scrubbed from this property. I did not want a single baby bottle, a single photograph, or a single piece of my clothing left behind. They moved with military precision. For 3 hours, I stood in the center of the house and watched them dismantle the life I had built with a man who never deserved me. They packed up Zuri's nursery carefully, transporting her smart bassinet and her pristine white crib into the waiting climate-controlled trucks. They emptied my closets, cleared out my office, and stripped the walls of the art I had purchased. I directed the movers to leave exactly one room intact, the massive open-concept dining area. I instructed them to leave the long, heavy glass dining table directly in the center of the room, flanked by exactly 6 leather chairs. I wanted the space to look cold, hollow, and strictly professional. It no longer looked like a warm family home. It looked exactly like a sterile corporate boardroom. When the movers finally closed the doors to their trucks and drove away, the house was completely barren. Our voices echoed against the empty walls. The physical emptiness of the house perfectly mirrored the absolute emptiness I now felt toward my husband. With the house completely stripped, it was time to strip away the final remnants of the helpless housewife. I had spent the last 30 days wrapped in faded sweatpants and oversized maternity shirts, playing the part of the discarded victim to absolute perfection. That role was officially retired. At noon, a private styling team I had contracted arrived at the empty house. They set up their mirrors and ring lights in the barren living room. For 2 hours, I sat in absolute silence as they transformed me. My hair was styled into a sleek, flawless press that cascaded sharply over my shoulders. My makeup was applied with meticulous precision, highlighting the sharp contours of my face and hiding any lingering trace of postpartum fatigue. I looked vibrant, rested, and terrifyingly untouchable. Then I stepped into the master bathroom to put on the armor I had purchased specifically for this exact occasion. I slid into a meticulously tailored bone-white Tom Ford power suit. The fabric felt like a second skin cut so perfectly it commanded authority before I even spoke a single word. I paired it with a silk emerald green blouse and towering Christian Louboutin heels that clicked sharply against the bare hardwood floors. I fastened a delicate understated diamond necklace around my throat. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. I did not look like a woman waiting for her husband to come home. I looked like a multimillionaire tech founder preparing to liquidate a hostile company. The sweatpants were gone, the tears were gone, the victim was dead and buried. I walked back into the empty dining room and took my seat at the very head of the long glass table. Zuri was resting in a portable high-tech sleep pod right beside my chair, cooing softly as she held her favorite plush toy. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, set my phone face up on the cool glass surface, and simply waited. The silence in the massive empty house was not lonely. It was the sound of absolute anticipation. I watched the clock on the wall tick forward. 2 in the afternoon. 3, 4. I knew their international flight was touching down at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport right on schedule. I knew they were currently gathering their designer luggage, laughing about their luxurious trip, and mentally preparing to walk through my front door to kick me out into the street. At exactly 4:45, my phone screen illuminated the glass table. The notification bell chimed loudly, echoing through the hollow room. It was a text message from Marcus. I picked up the phone, my manicured thumb hovering over the screen. He was sending his final arrogant command from the airport tarmac, completely unaware that a team of federal agents was already tracking his vehicle. His message was a solid block of aggressive text. "We are pulling up to the driveway right now. I told you I wanted you packed and gone before I got here. You have exactly 10 minutes to take the baby and get out of my house before I have Brent physically throw you out onto the lawn. You brought this on yourself, Nia." I read the hateful words, my expression remaining entirely smooth and unbothered. He still thought he held the power. He still thought he was the king of this castle. I tapped the screen and typed my response with deliberate, methodical keystrokes. I did not beg. I did not ask for more time. I did not match his frantic, petty anger. I sent him a single chilling reply. "The front door is unlocked. Come claim your kingdom." I set the phone down, folded my hands, and stared at the front door. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the bare hardwood floor, casting long, uninterrupted shadows through the vast, empty living room. I sat perfectly still at the head of the heavy glass dining table, the only piece of furniture left in the entire house. Beside my chair, my daughter Zuri rested peacefully in a state-of-the-art imported smart bassinet, her soft breathing the only sound breaking the absolute silence. I took a slow sip of sparkling water from a crystal glass. The cold condensation against my palm grounded me. From my vantage point, the front entrance was perfectly framed. I did not have to wait long. The crunch of expensive tires on the gravel driveway signaled their arrival. A heavy luxury vehicle had just pulled up, carrying the people who believed they had successfully ruined my life. Loud, boisterous laughter echoed through the thick wooden door. I heard the unmistakable metallic jingle of Marcus sliding his key into the lock. He was turning the deadbolt, fully expecting to walk into a house filled with my desperate tears and panicked pleas. He expected to find a defeated, exhausted mother drowning in federal debt. The heavy door burst open with an aggressive shove, swinging wide to reveal the arrogant procession. Marcus stepped over the threshold first, his skin bronzed from 30 days under the Indian Ocean sun. He wore designer resort wear and a cruel, triumphant smirk. Right behind him was his 22-year-old mistress clinging to his arm and carrying an oversized beach tote that Marcus had undoubtedly purchased using the money he stole from his own daughter. Brent and Jasmine followed them inside, completely drunk on their own perceived invincibility. Jasmine flipped her braided hair over her shoulder, complaining loudly about the humidity in Atlanta compared to the pristine breezes of the Maldives. Brent carried his leather weekend bag with the unbearable swagger of an investment banker who thought he had just executed the perfect financial crime. And bringing up the rear was Loretta. My mother-in-law strutted into my foyer with her chin held high, wearing a floral church dress, and the absolute certainty that she was finally going to watch me get thrown out onto the street. They moved as a pack, a toxic unified front of greed and racial microaggressions, fully prepared to witness my total destruction. But as they crossed from the entryway into the main living area, the loud, arrogant laughter abruptly died in their throats. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. The mistress bumped into his back, letting out a confused gasp. Brent and Jasmine froze right behind them, their smug expressions shattering into identical masks of utter confusion. Loretta dropped her purse onto the floor. The heavy thud echoed loudly, bouncing off the completely barren walls. The sprawling, luxurious home they remembered was entirely gone. There were no velvet sofas, there were no expensive rugs. The custom artwork had been stripped from the drywall. The massive television was gone. Even the decorative plants had been systematically removed. The expansive house was nothing but polished wood and empty, echoing space. Their eyes slowly tracked across the barren room until they finally landed on me. I was sitting at the head of the glass table, completely motionless, occupying the space with the absolute authority of a billionaire chief executive officer. I did not look like the stressed, weeping woman they had left behind. I was wearing a meticulously tailored bone-white Tom Ford power suit. My hair was professionally styled into a sharp, flawless press that framed my face perfectly. My makeup was immaculate. I looked directly at the people who had conspired to send me to federal prison, my face completely devoid of any fear or intimidation. I casually picked up my crystal glass, took another slow sip of sparkling water, and set it down without breaking eye contact. The sheer visual contrast between what they expected and what they were actually seeing caused a massive short circuit in their arrogant minds. Brent stared at my tailored suit, his mouth slightly open, completely unable to process why the black woman he had mocked was currently radiating more wealth and power than he had ever possessed. Jasmine looked around the empty room in absolute horror, her eyes darting from the bare walls back to my perfectly composed face. Loretta stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly by her sides, suddenly realizing that the narrative she had constructed in her head was entirely false. The helpless victim from South Atlanta was nowhere to be found. Marcus was the first to try and salvage his crumbling ego. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward into the empty room in a desperate attempt to assert his dominance. He forced a loud, nervous laugh that echoed awkwardly against the bare walls. He looked around the empty space, gesturing wildly with his hands to his sister and his brother-in-law. "What is this?" Nia Marcus demanded, his voice cracking slightly before he forced it into a condescending tone. "Did you really panic this badly? Did you actually sell all of our custom furniture just to pay for a cheap divorce lawyer? You are so incredibly pathetic. I told you to pack your bags and get out of my house. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I simply folded my manicured hands on top of the cool glass table and offered my husband a smile that was entirely made of ice. "No, Marcus," I replied, my voice steady, sharp and echoing with absolute finality. "I did not sell the furniture to pay for a lawyer. I am just clearing out some space for the new owners." Marcus stood paralyzed, his ego short-circuited. He had no script for a wife who did not cower. Brent aggressively pushed past him. The arrogant investment banker marched right up to the glass table, planting both hands firmly on the surface and leaning over me in a textbook display of physical intimidation. He looked down at me with absolute contempt, completely unbothered by the fact that he had stolen $2 million using my forged digital signature just 30 days ago. "You are playing a very stupid game," Nia Brent spat. "You failed to pay the massive margins and now the bank has seized the property. So stop sitting there pretending you have power. Put the keys on the table, pick up your crying baby, and walk out the front door right now before I call the local police and have you physically removed for trespassing on a foreclosed estate." I did not flinch. I held his aggressive gaze with unblinking calm. I slowly reached down to the floor beside my chair. I lifted a massive, incredibly thick legal binder bound in dark premium leather. I placed it squarely on the center of the glass table. The heavy thud echoed loudly through the hollow room, making Jasmine jump in the entryway. "I am not trespassing, Brent," I stated smoothly. "The bank did not foreclose on this house. I cleared out the furniture because I am preparing to sell the property on my own terms. You see, when you have an influx of liquid capital, you tend to want to upgrade your living situation very quickly." I slid the heavy binder across the smooth glass. It stopped directly in front of Brent's hands. Marcus found his voice stepping forward with an angry scowl. "What liquid capital? What are you talking about, Nia? Our accounts are completely empty. I made sure of it." "You made sure the joint savings account was empty, Marcus," I corrected. "But you were so focused on stealing $150,000 that you failed to notice what I was building. During my entire pregnancy, while you were complaining about me being a lazy burden, I spent my time coding an artificial intelligence maternal health application called Melanin Mama." Jasmine let out a mocking laugh from the doorway. "An app? Are you serious right now? You think coding a little mommy blog app gives you the right to talk to my husband like this?" I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on Brent. Yesterday morning, I finalized a secure video conference with the executive acquisition team at a major Silicon Valley tech conglomerate. They reviewed the beta testing for my predictive health algorithms. They offered me a complete, unconditional buyout of my intellectual property. The funds cleared my private accounts yesterday afternoon. Marcus froze, his eyes widening as the implication dawned on his greedy mind. "Buyout," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How much?" "Exactly $45 million, I replied evenly. "In cash." The air was sucked out of the room. Marcus physically stumbled backward, hitting the drywall. He looked as if he had just seen a ghost, his face drained of all color, his eyes wide with staggering shock. Jasmine covered her mouth with both hands, her mocking laugh dying instantly. Loretta let out a strangled gasp, clutching her chest. But Brent did not collapse. The arrogant investment banker simply refused to believe a black woman sitting in front of him had outsmarted the system. He threw his head back and let out a loud, booming laugh that dripped with pure condescension. $45 million. Brent chuckled, shaking his head as if dealing with a highly delusional child. "That is a very cute fantasy, Nia. Truly. But even if by some absolute miracle you manage to sell a piece of software, it does not change the financial reality standing in front of you. Your husband still owes my firm $2 million. He signed a federal business loan, and that massive debt is legally binding. So you can take your imaginary millions and play CEO all you want, but you still have to pay me my money today." I watched him closely. I watched the absolute certainty in his posture, the smug superiority in his smile, the unwavering belief that he was the smartest person in the room. I was about to shatter that belief into a million microscopic pieces. "Open the legal binder, Brent," I commanded softly. He rolled his eyes at me, sighing loudly, as he aggressively flipped open the heavy leather cover with absolute disdain. "Turn to page 4. I instructed, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "Read the third paragraph." Brent lazily turned the thick pages, his eyes scanning the dense legal text. I silently watched his face. I watched the exact beautiful moment his absolute arrogance shattered into pure, unadulterated panic. The smug smile slowly slid off his face like melting wax. His jaw went completely slack. The blood rapidly drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking sickly and pale. His hands began to tremble so violently that the heavy pages of the binder rattled loudly against the thick glass table. "You see, Brent?" I continued, my voice slicing through the silent room like a perfectly sharpened scalpel. "I did not just sell an application to a Silicon Valley conglomerate. I used my new wealth and my immense corporate leverage to create a blind shell company in Delaware. And through that blind shell company, I aggressively purchased a very specific portfolio of highly distressed corporate debt from their subsidiary." "Your debt portfolio?" Brent slowly looked up at me, his eyes wide with absolute suffocating terror. He desperately tried to speak, but absolutely no sound came out of his dry, tightening throat. I leaned forward, folding my manicured hands neatly on the clean surface of the heavy glass table. You owe the $2 million to my shell company. I am foreclosing on your firm effectively immediately. Brent stood frozen at the table, his eyes locked on the legal binder that detailed his total financial execution. The reality of his catastrophic failure paralyzed him completely. But while Brent was drowning in his ruined career, Marcus was rapidly calculating a completely different angle. My husband was a selfish, opportunistic coward, and cowards possess a very specific survival instinct. His mind bypassed the reality of the $2 million debt and latched entirely onto the $45 million cash buyout I had just announced. The sheer magnitude of that number finally registered in his greedy brain. The aggressive posture he had walked in with evaporated in seconds. The man who had just ordered me to pack my bags and get out of his house suddenly looked at me as if I were his ultimate salvation. He stepped away from his mistress, abandoning the woman he had spent the last 30 days entertaining. Marcus moved toward the center of the room, his eyes wide and frantic with a sudden desperate hope. He looked around the empty, barren living room, and then he looked back at me, sitting calmly at the head of the glass table. His entire demeanor transformed from a conquering king to a desperate beggar. He rushed forward and literally threw himself onto his knees right beside my chair. The heavy thud of his knees hitting the bare hardwood floor echoed loudly in the silent house. He reached out with trembling fingers, desperately trying to grab my hand. "Nia, baby," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He looked up at me with wide, tear-filled eyes, attempting to project a sense of love that had never existed. "Do you hear what you just said? $45 million. You did it, baby. We are rich. We are so incredibly rich." He tried to force a laugh, a pathetic wavering sound that reeked of sheer desperation. I know I was angry when I walked in, but I was just stressed about the bank. I was overwhelmed by the debt. But this changes absolutely everything for us. We can pay off Brent's debt right now and still have over $40 million left for our family. We can buy a bigger house. We can travel the world. You and me, Nia, we are a team. This is marital property, baby. We hit the absolute jackpot. I am so sorry for leaving you. I was wrong. Just please let me make it right. Let me be the husband and the father you deserve. He reached for my hand again, his palms sweaty and shaking. I looked down at the man kneeling on the floor beside me. I felt absolutely no pity, no lingering affection, and no hesitation. I smoothly pulled my hand away from his grasp with profound disgust. I did not let his skin touch mine. I leaned back in my chair and looked at him like he was a stain on the polished floor. "You have a very selective memory, Marcus," I stated, my voice completely devoid of warmth. "You love the phrase marital property now that a $45 million fortune is sitting on the table. But that is not how you felt 5 years ago." I watched his desperate smile falter. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up a slim white folder. I placed it on the glass table next to Brent's foreclosure documents. "Do you remember what this is, Marcus? Because I remember it perfectly. 5 years ago, we were engaged. You had just landed your massive 6-figure tech salary. I was just a girl from South Atlanta trying to pay off my student loans. Loretta convinced you I was nothing but a gold digger trying to secure a meal ticket. So you dragged me into a lawyer's office exactly 2 weeks before our wedding day and forced me to sign an ironclad prenuptial agreement. You wanted to make absolutely certain that a girl from the South Side could never touch a single dime of your tech money if we ever got divorced." Marcus stared at the white folder, his face draining of whatever color had returned to it. He swallowed hard, his throat visibly tight. "You drafted the most aggressive, restrictive prenup your highly paid lawyers could legally construct," I continued relentlessly. I opened the white folder and pulled out the crisp legal document. I flipped directly to the 3rd page and tapped my manicured finger against a very specific, bolded paragraph. I read the words out loud so every single person in the empty room could hear them clearly. Article 7, Section 4. Any and all intellectual property business ventures, software applications, or digital platforms created, developed, or founded by either party, during the course of the marriage shall remain the sole exclusive and separate property of the creator. All financial proceeds, buyouts, and revenue generated from said intellectual property are strictly excluded from marital assets and are not subject to division. I closed the folder and looked at Marcus. His mouth was open in a silent scream of realization. You wanted to protect your tech salary from me, Marcus. But all you actually did was legally protect my $45 million tech empire from you. You do not get half. You do not get a percentage. You get absolutely nothing. The reality of his total financial ruin crushed him. He slumped forward, burying his face in his hands as he let out a pathetic sob. While Marcus was weeping on the bare hardwood floor, the young mistress finally processed the situation. She realized the arrogant executive she had been sleeping with was currently heavily in debt, facing federal foreclosure, and completely cut out of his wife's massive fortune. She did not hesitate for a single second. The mistress adjusted her oversized designer beach tote on her shoulder, turned on her heel, and sprinted straight out the open front door without a single backward glance. The sharp click of the mistress's heels faded down the driveway, leaving a suffocating silence in the vast, empty living room. Marcus remained crumpled on the bare hardwood floor, sobbing into his hands. Brent was still frozen at the glass table, staring blankly at the foreclosure documents that had just ended his entire career. The absolute financial slaughter was complete. From my vantage point at the head of the table, I watched the remaining members of this toxic family process their new reality. I looked directly at Loretta. My mother-in-law was standing near the foyer. The haughty arrogance she had worn like a crown when she first walked through my front door had entirely vanished. She looked small, fragile, and utterly terrified. Loretta had spent her entire life surviving on social status and the financial success of the men around her. She was a master manipulator who knew exactly when the ship was sinking. She looked at her son weeping on the floor. She looked at her son-in-law paralyzed by his own massive debt. Then she looked at me sitting perfectly composed in my white power suit with a $45 million fortune secured in my private accounts. She realized instantly that I held absolutely all the cards. Her survival instinct kicked in with sickening speed. Loretta smoothed down her floral church dress, forced a trembling smile onto her face, and slowly walked toward my end of the glass table. She completely ignored Marcus crying on the floor, stepping right over his designer shoes to get closer to me. "Nia, sweetheart," Loretta began, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet maternal warmth that made my stomach turn. "I know things look very bad right now, but we can figure this out as a family. You have to believe me. I never agreed with what Marcus did to you. I told him he was making a terrible mistake leaving you and my precious granddaughter alone. I swear to you I tried to stop him." I sat back in my chair, keeping my hands folded neatly on the cool glass. I did not blink. "You tried to stop him?" I repeated, my voice flat and devoid of any emotion. "Is that why you sent me a text message telling me to keep the baby quiet and be grateful he gave a girl from South Atlanta a good life? Is that why you showed up at my front door with a police officer and tried to have Child Protective Services take Zuri away from me so Marcus could claim full custody?" Loretta's fake smile faltered violently. The mention of the failed Child Protective Services ambush caused a fresh wave of panic to wash over her features. She reached out, trying to touch my arm. "Nia, that was just a terrible misunderstanding. I was just worried about the baby. I am a grandmother. You have to understand, I was just acting out of love. I never wanted Marcus to steal your money. I am on your side, Nia. We are family." I smoothly pulled my arm away before her fingers could brush my suit. "You are not on my side, Loretta," I stated coldly. "You are on the side of whoever is writing the checks. And right now you are desperately trying to figure out how to keep your own hands clean." I reached into the interior pocket of my tailored blazer. I pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper and placed it delicately on the glass table right next to the foreclosure binder. I smoothed out the creases with my manicured fingers. "Do you recognize this piece of paper, Loretta?" Loretta stared down at the table. Her eyes widened in absolute horror. She instinctively reached up and touched her wrist where a heavy, sparkling diamond watch rested against her skin. You were in such a frantic rush to escape the police officer on my front porch that your designer handbag caught on the doorframe, I explained, my voice slicing through the quiet room. Your bag spilled open and you left this behind. It is a sales receipt from a high-end luxury boutique in the Maldives. It is for a diamond watch priced at exactly $45,000. Loretta stumbled backward, her hands shaking violently. I can explain, she stammered. Marcus bought that for me as a thank you gift for helping with the baby. Marcus bought it using a credit card tied directly to the federal business loan he secured by forging my digital signature, I corrected, sharply tapping the receipt. He bought you a $45,000 luxury watch using stolen government funds. And you proudly wore it back into the country. You carried stolen federal property across international lines. Loretta's face turned an ashen shade of gray. She grabbed her wrist desperately, trying to unclasp the heavy diamond watch as if it were burning her skin. Do not bother taking it off, I advised, leaning forward. Yesterday afternoon, when I was speaking with the federal authorities about your son's massive wire fraud, I made sure to hand them this exact receipt. I reported the watch as purchased with stolen funds. It is now officially classified as federal evidence. They are going to seize it, Loretta. And because you accepted a luxury gift purchased with stolen government money, you are legally implicated in the conspiracy to defraud a federal institution. Loretta let out a strangled gasp. Her knees buckled and she collapsed into one of the leather dining chairs, clutching her chest as she hyperventilated. The matriarch of the family had been completely neutralized. Jasmine let out a furious scream that shattered the absolute silence. She stomped across the floor, pointing at my face. You think you are so smart? Jasmine shrieked. You pathetic gold digger! I will destroy you! She lunged forward, aggressively raising her hand. Before she could strike, a loud mechanical click echoed sharply. Suddenly, the kitchen door slid open. Jasmine raised her hand high above her head. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred and uncontrolled rage. She was fully prepared to strike me right across the face. She wanted to physically punish me for stripping away the false reality she and her arrogant family had enjoyed for the past month. But her hand never completed its downward arc. The heavy mechanical click of the kitchen door sliding open froze her completely in place. Heavy, synchronized footsteps echoed like thunder against the bare hardwood floors of my empty house. The sound was not the hesitant shuffle of a local police wellness check. It was the precise, methodical, and overwhelming march of absolute authority. From the kitchen and the adjoining hallway, 6 heavily armed federal agents marched directly into the vast living room. They wore dark tactical gear. The bold yellow letters spelling out FBI were emblazoned across the thick protective vests covering their chests. They did not shout or draw their weapons, but their physical presence instantly dominated every single square inch of the room. They moved with a terrifyingly calm efficiency, fanning out in a calculated formation. Within seconds, the 6 federal agents had positioned themselves in a solid, impenetrable line, standing directly behind my chair at the glass dining table. They formed a literal wall of federal protection at my back. I did not flinch. I did not even turn around to look at them. I simply sat perfectly still, in my bone-white suit, watching the utter destruction of my enemies unfold exactly as I had orchestrated. Jasmine stood paralyzed, her arms still suspended awkwardly in the air. Her mouth hung open. The drunken bravado that had fueled her aggressive outburst evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, suffocating terror. She slowly lowered her hand, stepping backward until she bumped into the wall. Loretta pressed herself deep into the leather dining chair, pulling her knees together and making herself as small as physically possible. The matriarch, who had spent years loudly commanding every room she entered, was now completely silent, trembling uncontrollably as she stared at the federal badges gleaming under the afternoon sunlight. But the most beautiful and satisfying reaction belonged entirely to Brent. The wealthy, arrogant investment banker stood near the foyer, his eyes darting frantically between the tactical gear and my perfectly composed face. For his entire life, Brent had relied on the thick, insulating shield of his white privilege. He had navigated the corporate world believing that his expensive tailored suits, His country club memberships and his inherent social status made him completely untouchable. He genuinely believed that even if he made a massive financial mistake, he could simply talk his way out of it, pay a small fine, and go back to his luxurious life. But as he stared at the federal agent standing in my living room, the crushing reality of his situation finally shattered that lifelong delusion. The unencrypted ledgers he had accidentally forwarded to me, the forged digital signatures on the federal business loan, the direct transfer of $2 million stolen dollars into his failing corporate accounts. He knew I had given all of it to the authorities. He realized in that exact moment that his privilege could not bribe charm or negotiate his way out of a federal wire fraud indictment. Survival instinct overrode whatever rational thought he had left. Brent spun around, his eyes locking onto the heavy glass doors leading out to the back patio. He made a desperate, pathetic decision. The arrogant financial titan bolted. He lunged toward the back exit, his leather weekend bag slipping from his shoulder and crashing onto the floor. He did not make it 3 steps. The federal agent positioned nearest to the hallway moved with blinding speed. The agent intercepted Brent, effortlessly grabbing the lapels of his expensive tailored jacket and driving him forcefully downward. The impact of Brent hitting the bare hardwood floor was loud and brutal. The sickening sound of his designer suit tearing at the shoulder echoed through the room. The agent drove a knee sharply into Brent's lower back, pinning him flat against the floorboards. Brent let out a breathless, humiliated groan as his arms were wrenched forcefully behind his back. The sharp metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly around his wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. The man who had stood in my kitchen 30 days ago and told me not to stress my little head about big finance was now eating dust on my living room floor, thoroughly neutralized and stripped of all his arrogant power. Marcus watched his powerful brother-in-law get tackled and cuffed like a common criminal. The sight completely broke whatever tiny fraction of sanity my husband had left. Marcus scrambled backward on his hands and knees, scrambling away from the glass table and pressing his back against the front door. His chest heaved as he hyperventilated. He looked at the agents, then looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, begging desperation. He tried to speak, tried to formulate some kind of defense or excuse, but his vocal cords refused to cooperate. He was a coward trapped in a cage he had built with his own 2 hands. The lead agent stepped forward from the line behind me. It was Special Agent Miller, the same man I had spoken to in the unmarked office building the day before. He looked down at Brent, struggling pathetically on the floor, and then he turned his cold, professional gaze toward my weeping husband, pressed against the front door. Agent Miller did not raise his voice, but his words carried the crushing weight of the United States federal government. Marcus Hayes and Brent Sterling. Agent Miller stated, his voice ringing with absolute finality. You are both under arrest for federal wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to defraud a federal institution. You have the right to remain silent. I strongly suggest you use it. The heavy silence following Agent Miller's declaration lasted only a fraction of a second before Marcus completely lost his mind. He ignored the Miranda rights being read to him. He thrashed against the firm grip of the federal agents holding his arms securely behind his back. The metal handcuffs clinked sharply as he struggled. This is a setup. Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. His eyes darted wildly around the barren room, landing on me with a look of desperate, furious denial. She is lying to you. Nia is setting us up. I did not steal anything. She is trying to ruin my life because I went on a vacation. You have the wrong men. Agent Miller did not even blink at the emotional outburst. He simply tightened his grip on Marcus, forcing him to stand still. Brent, on the other hand, remained entirely silent on the hardwood floor. The arrogant investment banker was currently tasting the dust on my floorboards, his cheek pressed flat against the wood. He was a man accustomed to manipulating his way out of corporate mistakes, and I could see his eyes darting back and forth as his mind frantically tried to construct a plausible legal defense. He was already planning to blame the missing funds on a clerical error, a rogue employee, or a simple miscommunication regarding marital assets. I sat back in my chair at the head of the glass table and looked at my frantic husband. Marcus! I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic shouting with absolute calm. Do you honestly believe the Federal Bureau of Investigation dispatches a fully equipped tactical team to arrest a tech executive and an investment banker based on the angry word of a discarded wife? They do not operate on gossip. They operate on irrefutable concrete evidence. I reached across the smooth surface of the glass table and picked up my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times. A soft, clear chime echoed from the premium surround sound speakers seamlessly built into the ceiling of the living room. I had connected my device to the central audio system. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his chest heaving as he stared at the ceiling. "I am simply providing a little bit of context for your brother-in-law," I replied smoothly. "Brent looks like he is currently trying to figure out how to blame this entire $2 million fraud on a simple accounting error. I think it is only fair to show him exactly why that defense will never work in a federal courtroom." I pressed the play button on my screen. The pristine high-definition audio filled the vast empty space of the living room. The sound of crashing ocean waves and the sharp clinking of crystal champagne glasses poured from the ceiling speakers. Then a voice echoed through the house. It was loud, slurred, and dripping with an unmistakable toxic arrogance. "Oh, sweetie, you are so incredibly dense!" Jasmine gasped audibly, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. She recognized her own drunken voice instantly. The audio recording continued to play, capturing every single damning syllable. "Marcus and Brent are way too smart for you. They bypassed your little trust fund completely. They photoshopped your state identification and faked the IP address on your laptop to secure a federal business loan. $2 million, Nia. They put the entire loan in your name." The color completely drained from Jasmine's face. She stumbled backward, hitting the drywall with a soft thud. Her eyes were wide with a suffocating, paralyzing terror. The reality was pushing in tightly on her horrified expression, isolating her in her ultimate betrayal of her own family. She was listening to herself destroy her husband and her brother. The recording did not stop. Jasmine's voice echoed again, sealing their collective fate. "Brent works in high-level finance. He knows exactly how to manipulate the digital approval systems. He walked Marcus through the entire process. They forged your digital signature perfectly. The federal government thinks you took out the money to fund a failing business. When the loan defaults, the feds are coming straight for you. You are going down for it, Naya. You are going to prison, and my brother is going to take full custody of that baby." I paused the audio. The silence that slammed back into the room was absolutely deafening. Jasmine realized in that exact horrifying second that she had just provided the federal government with a comprehensive, legally binding confession. She had explicitly outlined the exact methodology of their interstate wire fraud. She had directly implicated her husband and her brother by name. She had gleefully explained their premeditated conspiracy to commit identity theft and defraud a federal institution, all while bragging about it on a pristine beach in the Maldives. Brent slowly turned his head from his position pinned on the floor. He looked up at his wife. The expression on the white investment banker's face was devoid of any love or partnership. He looked at Jasmine with pure, unadulterated hatred. His entire financial empire, his freedom, and his luxurious life had just been incinerated because his wife could not resist the urge to drink expensive champagne and brag to a woman she considered inferior. Brent closed his eyes, pressing his forehead against the floorboards as a low, guttural groan of absolute defeat escaped his throat. Marcus stopped struggling against the federal agents. The fight completely left his body. His shoulders slumped, and he stared at his sister with a look of utter disbelief and absolute ruin. The ironclad alibis they had surely practiced on the long flight home were completely useless now. The federal agent standing behind me had already matched the details of Jasmine's drunken confession to the unencrypted ledgers and the forged digital signatures. I looked directly at Jasmine, who was currently sliding down the wall to sit on the floor, trembling violently as tears of panic streamed down her perfectly contoured face. "You were entirely right about one thing, Jasmine. I stated, my voice ringing with cool authority. Brent and Marcus were very confident in their ability to manipulate the digital approval systems. They just forgot that I am a software developer who designed complex artificial intelligence algorithms for a living. Setting up a hidden camera with an encrypted cloud server to capture your telephone confession was the easiest technical task I have completed all year. Loretta stood frozen in the corner, her hands covering her face as she wept silently. The proud matriarch was watching her golden son and her wealthy son-in-law face decades in a federal penitentiary. The illusion of her superior, untouchable family had been utterly demolished by the very woman she had relentlessly mocked and belittled for 5 long years. Agent Miller stepped forward, breaking the heavy silence. He looked at the two defeated men. "You heard the recording," he said sharply. "The evidence is overwhelming. Lift him up." The agents hauled Brent to his feet, holding him firmly by his torn designer suit. Marcus did not resist as they adjusted their grip on his arms. The corporate execution was over, and the federal cleanup had officially begun. The trap had worked. I pushed my chair back from the heavy glass table. The harsh scrape of the legs against the bare hardwood floor commanded the attention of every single person remaining in the vast room. I stood slowly to my full height. I deliberately smoothed out the crisp lapels of my bone-white Tom Ford power suit. I looked down at the absolute wreckage of the men who had arrogantly tried to bury me. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I felt the pure, intoxicating rush of total victory. I had reclaimed my life, my home, and my daughter. The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted, leaving me standing at the absolute pinnacle of this corporate slaughter. Agent Miller looked at Marcus and Brent. "You have the right to remain silent." He began, his voice cutting through the stale air of the empty house with methodical precision. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand the rights I have just read to you?" Neither man answered. Brent was staring at the floorboards, his face twisted in a mask of pure, defeated agony. Marcus was quietly hyperventilating, his chest heaving under his wrinkled resort shirt. Agent Davis stepped forward and forcefully yanked his arms backward. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed violently throughout the barren living room. The sound was incredibly final. It was the undeniable sound of a luxurious, privileged life coming to an abrupt and permanent end. The federal agents moved in unison, turning the two disgraced executives toward the open front door. Brent stumbled forward, his torn designer jacket hanging pathetically off his slumped shoulders. He did not look at his wife. He did not look at me. He just stared blankly at the driveway, completely broken by the reality of his impending federal prosecution. Marcus, however, could not accept the sudden termination of his arrogant existence. As the agents dragged him forcefully past the glass dining table, he dug his expensive shoes into the hardwood floor, desperately fighting the forward momentum. He twisted his body around to face me one last time. Tears streamed down his panicked face, ruining his perfectly cultivated image. "Nia, please!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with absolute terror. "Please do not do this to me. She is my daughter. Zuri is my baby girl. You cannot take my family away from me. I am so sorry. I will do anything you want. Just tell them to stop. Please." I did not flinch. I did not soften. I looked directly into the eyes of the coward who had abandoned his 12-day-old daughter to fly to a tropical island. I looked at the man who had stolen my identity, drained our life savings, and conspired to send me to a federal prison. I held his desperate gaze with eyes made of absolute ice. I let the silence hang for a fleeting second before I delivered the final crushing blow. "The baby was too loud, Marcus." I stated, my voice completely smooth and devoid of any human warmth. "Enjoy the absolute quiet of a federal cell." Marcus let out a guttural, heartbroken wail as the agents forcefully shoved him through the front doorway. The heavy wooden door remained wide open, allowing the bright afternoon sunlight to spill into the foyer. I watched the tactical team escort my husband and his arrogant brother-in-law down the driveway and aggressively push them into the back of two waiting black sport utility vehicles. The doors slammed shut. The engines roared to life. Within seconds, the vehicles sped away down the street, carrying the architects of my suffering directly to a federal holding facility. The silence that rushed back into my empty living room was thick and suffocating. I turned my attention away from the open front door and slowly pivoted to face the only two people left standing in my house. Loretta and Jasmine were huddled together near the hallway, clinging to each other like terrified children. The malicious bravado they had worn like armor when they first strutted into my home had completely evaporated. They were currently staring at me with wide, horrified eyes, fully realizing that their primary sources of income, status, and protection had just been carted off to prison. Jasmine was shivering violently in her expensive resort wear. Loretta looked entirely aged, her hands shaking as she clutched her designer purse against her chest. They were waiting for me to scream at them, to insult them, to lower myself to their toxic level. I had absolutely no intention of doing that. I had already won the war. I picked up my phone from the glass table and tapped a single button. Instantly, three heavily built men wearing dark tailored suits and earpieces stepped out from the kitchen area. I had contracted a premium private security firm for the week, instructing them to wait out of sight until the federal authorities had concluded their business. The guards moved with silent, imposing efficiency, forming a semicircle around the two terrified women. Loretta gasped, stepping backward. "Nia, what are you doing?" she stammered, her voice stripped of all its former arrogance. "Where are we supposed to go?" "You are trespassing on private property, Loretta," I replied calmly. "My security team is going to escort you off the premises right now. You are both leaving this house exactly as you entered it, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your backs and the unbearable weight of your own colossal mistakes. You thought you could destroy me. Now you get to walk out the front door and figure out how to survive in the real world without Marcus and Brent to pay your bills." They left entirely empty-handed. I was completely alone. It was perfect. The front door clicked shut, sealing the profound, immaculate silence inside the sprawling house. I stood completely alone in the center of the vast, barren living room. I turned my back to the entryway and slowly walked toward the massive bay windows. The late afternoon sun poured through the flawless glass, washing over the bare hardwood floors and bathing my bone-white suit in a fierce golden light. I took a deep, unrestricted breath. The air no longer smelled of expensive, suffocating cologne or toxic familial expectations. It smelled entirely of pure, unadulterated freedom. The corporate slaughter was officially over, and the brutal wheels of federal justice had already begun to turn. The fallout from the arrests was swift, public, and absolutely devastating. Federal prosecutors do not play games with interstate wire fraud and identity theft, especially when the evidence is handed to them on a pristine silver platter. I did not have to lift another finger. I simply sat back and watched the entire arrogant empire systematically dismantle itself. The moment the heavy steel doors of the federal holding facility slammed shut, the fragile alliance between my ex-husband and his wealthy brother-in-law completely disintegrated. Brent, stripped of his custom-tailored suits and his towering white privilege, immediately panicked. Desperate to save his own skin, he aggressively attempted to throw Marcus directly under the federal bus. He ordered his defense attorneys to claim that Marcus was the sole mastermind behind the digital forgery and the unauthorized transfer of government funds. Brent tried to paint himself as an innocent investment banker who had been deeply deceived by a rogue manipulative tech executive. But the federal prosecutors had my encrypted backup drive. They had the unredacted financial ledgers proving Brent used the stolen $2 million to illegally plug the massive holes in his failing Ponzi scheme. More importantly, they had the crystal-clear audio recording of Jasmine's drunken confession on the beach in the Maldives. Her slurred, arrogant bragging explicitly detailed how Brent had walked Marcus through the entire digital manipulation process. There was no plea deal generous enough to save them. The federal judge presiding over the case showed them absolutely zero mercy. The courtroom was packed with defrauded investors and financial journalists when the final gavel fell. Marcus and Brent stood side by side in matching orange jumpsuits, their wrists shackled to their waists. They both received the maximum penalty for their coordinated crimes. 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The men who thought they were entirely untouchable were carted off to spend the next decade and a half locked inside a concrete box. The collateral damage was equally spectacular. Jasmine, the entitled sister who had mocked my South Atlanta roots and bragged about my impending downfall, was suddenly left with absolutely nothing. With Brent's investment firm completely liquidated by federal regulators to pay off his furious creditors, all of their personal assets were aggressively seized. The luxury cars, the designer wardrobes, the extensive jewelry collections, all vanished overnight. Jasmine was forced to file for total bankruptcy. Stripped of her immense wealth and her false superiority, she had no choice but to pack her remaining meager belongings into garbage bags. She moved back in with Loretta. The proud, judgmental matriarch had also lost everything when her son's fraudulent tech funds were frozen. They were forced to rent a cramped, miserable two-bedroom apartment in a neglected neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The women who had constantly looked down their noses at me were now permanently trapped in the exact type of impoverished life they had relentlessly shamed me for. The poetic justice was incredibly sweet. Meanwhile, my legal team moved with ruthless efficiency to permanently sever my ties to Marcus. The divorce proceedings were finalized in absolute record time. Marcus was a convicted federal felon with no assets, no income, and a documented history of severe financial abuse. He had absolutely zero leverage. I retained 100% of my $45 million fortune, completely protected by the very same prenuptial agreement he had arrogantly forced me to sign 5 years prior. More importantly, the family court judge took one look at his criminal record and his documented attempt to abandon his newborn daughter to flee the country. I was immediately granted full sole legal and physical custody of Zuri. Marcus was stripped of all parental rights, granted only heavily restricted supervised visitation that he would not even be able to utilize from behind federal bars. Zuri was completely safe, forever shielded from the toxic manipulative family that had tried to claim her as a pawn. But surviving their betrayal and securing my freedom was only the beginning of my true victory. I sat in my home office a month later, looking at the $45 million resting securely in my private accounts. I had no intention of just sitting quietly on that massive fortune. I was not going to buy a yacht and post arrogant pictures on a beach. I was going to use that money to fundamentally alter the landscape of the tech industry. Zuri was growing beautifully in her bright new nursery, surrounded by unconditional love and absolute security. I made a solemn promise that my daughter would never experience the cold, manipulative environment her father had tried to force upon us. She would absolutely grow up watching her resilient mother break every barrier, build incredible new companies, and unapologetically destroy anyone who ever dared to stand in our way again. I became the exact powerful gatekeeper the commercial tech industry desperately needed today. I used my immense capital and my proven technological expertise to exclusively fund, mentor, and elevate dozens of brilliant Black female founders. I was not just building my own corporate empire anymore. I was actively and deliberately funding an entire new army of brilliant, highly unstoppable women who would permanently transform the future of modern business forever. The headquarters of my venture capital firm currently occupies the top 3 floors of a gleaming glass skyscraper in downtown Los Angeles. We are not just participating in the tech industry. We are actively dictating its future. Every single day, I sit at the head of a massive custom-built boardroom table. It is not an empty table in a barren house used to execute a trap. It is a vibrant, dynamic space filled with the brightest, most innovative Black female minds in the country. We review pitches, we allocate millions of dollars in seed funding, and we turn brilliant ideas into global empires. I do not just hold a seat at the table anymore. I own the entire building. But my true sanctuary is located miles away from the noise of the corporate world. I purchased a sprawling, secluded estate tucked high into the hills of Beverly Hills. The property is surrounded by towering privacy hedges and secured by an elite round-the-clock security team. No one can ever simply march through my front door to demand my signature or insult my origins. The house features massive floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the canyons, offering an uninterrupted view of the Pacific Ocean in the distance. The air here is always warm, carrying the scent of jasmine and ocean salt. The most beautiful part of this estate is the sound that fills its halls. Zuri is a vibrant, brilliant, and incredibly happy little girl now. She runs barefoot across the manicured lawns, splashing in the infinity pool and playing with the golden retriever puppy we adopted last spring. Her joyous, unrestrained laughter echoes constantly through our home. That exact same sound, the sound of my beautiful daughter simply existing, was what Marcus once called too loud. He abandoned his entire family because he could not handle the mild inconvenience of a crying newborn. Today, Zuri's laughter is the absolute greatest soundtrack of my life. It is the sound of total unconditional victory. People often ask me how I managed to survive that incredibly dark period of my life. They ask how I kept my sanity when the man I loved drained our accounts and left me bleeding from surgery. The truth is that I did not merely survive. Survival implies simply enduring a storm and hoping you do not drown. I refuse to be a passive participant in my own tragedy. Society expects a very specific reaction from a woman who has been betrayed and abandoned, especially a mother in her postpartum vulnerability. We are expected to crumble. We are expected to weep, to beg for child support, to move back into our childhood bedrooms, and to let the men who ruined us dictate the terms of our future. Marcus, Brent, Jasmine, and Loretta completely relied on that societal script. They banked their entire fraudulent scheme on the assumption that a black woman from South Atlanta would simply fold under the immense pressure of their coordinated attack and their overwhelming privilege. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman they were dealing with. When I reflect on the concept of revenge, I realize that the term is often deeply misunderstood. People think revenge is about anger violence or petty retaliation. But the sweetest, most intoxicating revenge was not actually sending Marcus and Brent to a federal penitentiary, though knowing they are currently waking up in a concrete cell is an undeniably pleasant thought. The ultimate revenge was aggressively reclaiming my own narrative. They desperately wanted to write me into their story as a pathetic, disposable victim. They wanted to use my name, my credit, and my home as stepping stones for their own arrogant greed. Instead, I took the pen directly out of their hands. I rewrote the entire script and turned their luxury vacation into a devastating financial thriller, where I was the undisputed architect of their total downfall. I used their own massive egos, their racist microaggressions, and their profound underestimation of my intelligence as the exact weapons that destroyed them. I did not just defeat them, I legally and financially eradicated their entire existence. I am sharing my story because I know there are women out there currently sitting in the dark, looking at empty bank accounts, and listening to the echoes of doors slamming shut behind men who promised to stay. I know the sheer suffocating terror of feeling completely powerless, while the people who hurt you seem to be living their best lives without a single consequence. If you are in that dark place right now, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not waste your energy begging a coward to return. Do not waste your tears on people who view your pain as an inconvenience. Take a deep breath, look at the resources you have, and start calculating your next move. Your power has not been stolen. It is simply waiting for you to recognize it. Marcus looked at me sitting in a nursery and saw nothing but a quiet, exhausted mother. He saw a burden he could easily discard, but he forgot one fundamental, terrifying truth about the nature of a woman. A mother actively protecting her child does not just survive the storm. She becomes the storm. She builds massive empires from the absolute wreckage of her past. And she ruthlessly, methodically burns down absolutely anything and anyone that stands in her way.